Welcome to another edition of Eye on the Issues. Today we are talking energy, nuclear energy. To be specific, I am talking with Mary Beth Brannigan. She is the director and the producer of what's called the San Onofre Syndrome Nuclear Powers Legacy. Mary Beth, begin by telling us what is San Onofre. I know it's a former nuclear power plant, but tell us a little bit about the background.
Well, in 2011, when Fukushima happened, we decided we better uh, attend to shutting down our nuclear power plants here in California because they were in the same situation as Fukushima. And San Onofre, the same situation being surrounded by earthquake faults and in tsunami zones right on the coast. So in 2011, we started becoming very active in working to shut down San Onofre. San Onofre um, is in Southern California, in the area right between um, LA and uh, San Diego, in what's considered the most densely populated area of the United States. So San Onofre is located also in a place that was called Earthquake Bay. Not
Hmm.
very reassuring place to put it. And actually on a Marine base. They lease land from the Marines. And so there were many problems with this nuclear power plant over the years. And finally, it did get shut down in 2013. And then we continued to document all of the um, ongoing drama because the citizens who had become active and who were had fought to shut it down then discovered the horrific situation with the nuclear waste and the plan to put it right on the edge of the plant, which is 100 feet from the ocean's edge. And the ocean is rising very rapidly, much more rapidly than people had suspected would happen. And so this is a horrendous situation right now.
Incredible. So let's talk about while the plant was operating in terms of problems, complaints, whistleblower, things like that. Can you give us a little bit of background of how troubled this plant was?
Right. Well, the whistleblowers were coming forward and anonymously reporting some of them were just willing to expose themselves amazingly. They were very brave, and then had to sign gag orders. But the whistleblowers were warning that they had so many safety violations there, and that in return for reporting them, they would be retaliated against. So they had to get the word out outside of the um, recognized routes that you're supposed to take to make those allegations of problems, to get attention to that situation. And one of the characters in our film, Donna Gilmore, who was a systems analyst, made she got educated by a whistleblower and enough to make graphs based on the Nuclear Regulatory Commission's data. The NRC is the regulatory agency overseeing supposedly the safety at nuclear power plants. And you can see that it was by far the most beset with problems of any other power plant in the US and had the highest rate of retaliation to workers that reported safety problems.
And what did it finally take to get it shut down?
Well, the company ordered new steam generators and had them redesigned in such a way that would ostensibly, they thought, produce more electricity. But that design was going to do that by eliminating a very crucial part of the infrastructure in the steam generators. And so it was brand new design, and no one could prove either way. But then, sure enough, less than a year after it was installed, they were installed, there was a leak, a rate of radioactivity that was enough to um, make the utility shut it down. Well, you have to, and although they say it was a very small leak, you would not have even noticed it. No utility would shut down um, uh, a leak that was very small. So after going back and forth and trying to restart it even before they understood what would happen with a broken steam generator to be operated anyway, um, they were going to go ahead and restart it, uh, which is very telling. And then because it was risking the entire area, um, you know, a horrible event like Fukushima could have occurred there. And uh, meanwhile, the Friends of the Earth, anyway, that organization helped a lot. And they were able to raise the money for a lawsuit to challenge what the utility was doing. And uh, our Senator Barbara Boxer at the time was very supportive and concerned about what was happening. So eventually they finally gave up.
So, talk to me about why, obviously the plant's been shut down for I guess a little bit over a decade. You made this documentary and it came out within the last year or so. Why'd you make the documentary? What are you trying to teach people?
Well, the what we were trying to do, first of all, was to protect California against a Fukushima-like disaster. And we have two more, another operating nuclear power plant, Diablo Canyon, that's between um, Northern California. It's in Central California, um, and that one also needs to be shut down because it's in the same situation. And it was promised to be shut down uh, in this year and next year. But then our governor decided to renege on that promise. And even though it hadn't been maintained since the agreement to shut it down, all of this is uh, to explain how deals can be made and broken. You have to be so careful when you're dealing with nuclear um, industry issues. So we made this film to follow the story to see what would happen and to as a cautionary tale. And now it for sure is a cautionary tale for the whole country. That's why we called it the San Onofre syndrome. It's a syndrome of that's shared at every nuclear power plant site in the country, and like uh, there's 94 operating nuclear uh, reactors in the country, but there I noticed in the slides you showed me that the NRC is uh, uh, admitting that there are more than that that are operating what are called the independent storage facility on site, ISFAC for short.
Mhm. Right.
So it's a syndrome that they're being mismanaged. The
Mhm.
the storage of radioactive waste is being mismanaged. And okay, so they got the plant shut down, and we thought at first that was the big story. But then when they found out what the horrible situation with the radioactive waste, they put it into a very, very, very thin, thin-walled containers that aren't uh, believed to be um, going to last much more than 40 years at the most. And this is to contain substances that will be lethal for millions of years. So
And
that's the problem.
do we know why those containers were so thin-walled? That I mean, as you just mentioned, the amount of time this waste is going to last, and then you have a 40-year lifespan of this casket, if you will. I mean, that's nothing.
Right, it isn't. And especially somebody figured out the ratio of the thickness of the shell to the pounds that it was containing, just pounds. And it's like eggshell. It would be an eggshell protecting because it's like 52 tons of this lethal radioactive waste inside it. And it probably because it would be less expensive and for the utilities, but other countries put them into uh, thick walled casts that are poured, so there aren't any welds needed. And that's very important because welds are points where corrosion can start. I mean, it's almost impossible to stop corrosion around welds when you have something as intensely corrosive as the radioactivity combined with whatever weather elements there are.
So let me ask you this: where is that spent nuclear fuel from San Onofre right now?
Oh, it's in um, cement holes in the ground that are inches above the water table, or they were inches above the water table uh, over a decade ago, and the water table's been rising because the ocean level, they're only 108 feet from the edge of the ocean. So, in a king tide that we just had recently, combined with the super full moon, which we just had last Friday, that raises the tidal level 3 to more feet. And then if you had a storm at the same time, that storm surge could wipe over those uh, canisters, which have to be left open to the atmosphere. They've got vents in them because the um, heat has to, they use convection to cool them off because the waste is so hot. It's like 400 and some degrees or
So,
more.
so why is the waste still there on property, and why have they not tried to move it to a better location?
Well, first of all, moving it is next to impossible. And they also don't have any place to move it to. What you see, the United States Nuclear Waste Act of 1982 promised, go ahead and make the waste. We'll figure it out later. And it should be put into a permanent repository, they said, in that 1982 Act,
Mhm.
and that the in the interim that it should be in containers that would be monitorable and retrievable, and but in the meantime, the utilities have tended to mostly put them into these very thin stainless steel containers and weld them shut. Now, how do you inspect whether they are all right to move unless you can see what the fuel pellets look like, and you can't do that when they're welded shut. And also another shocking thing that we discovered um, after the plant shut down was the use of what they call high burnup fuel, and that meant that the fuel could be left in the reactors longer, and this had to be used for the heat generation to make steam to make electricity, and it meant that the time that they were down to refuel the reactor was it lessened, and so they could make more money by doing that. So in the meantime, they didn't have any understanding of what that would mean if you left it in the reactors longer. And but labs did do a very comprehensive study of that later and found that the longer you leave it in, the more fragile and brittle it becomes, and the more easily um, uh, jarred into a problem state.
So
A
let me throw
lot.
this at you there, Mary Beth. So as you know, Wyoming is the lawmakers in Wyoming, as I've told you, are considering legislation that would allow nuclear waste, spent nuclear fuel, to be stored in the state. They're considering that. What's your message to the people of Wyoming from an educational standpoint? What do they need to know before a decision like this is made?
They need to know that just recently the Nuclear Advance Act was passed, and that further eroded the safety regulations um, uh, that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is bound by, because it actually put in language that required them to put um, efficiency for the utility over any other consideration. And this is happening uh, after we've observed years and years and years of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission not abiding by its own regulations anyway, and giving constant exemptions to the rules to any utility that filed and requested that. So uh, you can't trust that your environment, your climate, your water, your food, your uh, beautiful mountains, and all of your incredible geography there in Wyoming wouldn't be totally devastated. You cannot trust that it wouldn't be. It has been in numerous places across the U.S. already, like
No.
Ohio, right and in California.
Now, I would imagine technology over the last couple of decades when it comes to nuclear waste probably has improved. Do you happen to, I don't know if you're up to speed on that, but obviously, the technology that was used to store the spent nuclear fuel in that California plant on the coast down there, it would be different than what would happen in Wyoming. Do we know if the technology is better and things could be safer, or what are your thoughts on that?
That's a good question. Well, what I can tell you is that the design for the uh, uh, what they call centralized interim storage in Texas and in New Mexico, where they targeted for accepting this waste, is the same design that we have in California. And although it's um, uh, in the desert in New Mexico and Texas, when it does rain, it really rains. It just rains a couple of times a year, but it really um, gets you know quite a lot comes down at one time, and they didn't want to consider that. They didn't want to consider any of the other uh, points that those of us who were concerned about that, those sites were bringing up. They would dismiss any of the concerns that we were bringing up, totally dismissed. And that is their pattern.
And
So the design is the same. They say if the canister arrives at the facility leaking, what are you going to do? They say they would, um, in the plans for New Mexico and Texas, they would send back the leaking container. But come on, that that would be horrendous. To do that, leaking, traveling all over the United States, back to wherever it came from. And how could people um, survive who were driving these trucks with it? And I mean, um, also, the trains have also been um, having a lot more accidents lately because they're stressing efficiency, not safety. Just everywhere you look, that's the story, stressing speed over safety.
now, I know in the state of Wyoming, for example, I was watching a legislative meeting that had been held over the summer at the end of July, with the Joint Minerals Business and Economic Development Committee, um, and they were talking about the possibility of um, the state being paid upwards of $4 billion a year to store dry storage of spent nuclear fuel. Give me a reaction to that, hearing those numbers.
What can 4 billion? It can't decontaminate your land. It can't make whatever food is grown around there already, uncontaminated. It would, when you have a problem with radioactivity, it's forever. It's for forever. And the water, for instance, by the way, when you have these canisters the way they are now in the thin walls, and you have to use convection to allow for the cooling process, or they'd overheat and have problems with uranium and all the other radionuclides inside of them. Um, that they are now, we just realizing, constantly streaming the radioactivity out of the containers because of that need for convection. They can't stop the gamma from coming out of thin containers, and then that mixes with the moisture in the cement. It decomposes the cement and tritiates the water, and what's called tritiates. It forms tritium, which is radioactive water.
Mhm.
And it also forms radioactive carbon, carbon 14, with the carbon that happens to be in the vicinity. So, which is, the most plentiful, one of the most plentiful molecules in the planet. So it, it just 4 billion, that's nothing compared to
Mhm.
what to clean, uh, because what can happen from radioactivity is to destroy your immune system, not just cancers, but heart disease, thyroid problems, endocrine problems, reproduction problems. Um, it's kidney disease. It's not worth it.
And so if people want to watch your documentary and learn more about your story, where can they go?
Sanonofre And that's Sanonofre syndrome, syndrome.com. And it's easily watched. You can find it on Apple Prime, Amazon Prime. What is it? Amazon Prime and
Mhm.
other platforms, many other platforms.
Okay, and then there's also a trailer. So if somebody wants to get a little bit of a sneak peek, they can take a look at the trailer. That'll give them an idea of what they're going to see. Is that correct?
That's right. We have a 90-second trailer on our website that you can, and there's also loads of background material, and we keep up with the evolving issues in our news feed on the website too.
All
So,
right.
yeah, it would be a heartbreaking situation for Wyoming to accept this.
Mhm. And I need to go back and to your story for a second. So with those canisters there, with the spent nuclear fuel, not too far from the ocean, 108 feet or whatever it is from the ocean, what's the plan to take care of that? Because there needs to be a
Oh,
plan. At least I hope there is.
that what we're advocating is to emulate some components of the state-of-the-art way to manage the waste in an interim manner that uh, Switzerland has used. And we do have the mayor of the largest city closest to it, Irvine, in California, is uh, right now developing um, legislation for the state to come up with a plan to do that very thing, to make sure that it's at least moved to higher ground away from the ocean. I'm afraid it would still have to be an earthquake, um, you know, country because the risk of transporting it is so huge, and it's so heavy that it would be so hard on the train tracks, for instance, or and they say, oh, we can do it just fine because the Navy's done it. But the Navy has always had much smaller shipments,
Mhm.
very because their reactors are on their ships. They're not huge plants, they're small. And they've they don't transport 52 tons at a time.
Mhm. And let me ask you this one other question. There's a smaller, as you may have heard, nuclear reactor being built in the state of Wyoming, much smaller than, for example, the one there in Southern California that was operational until 2013. Is smaller safer, or do you have give me your reaction to hearing that news?
Well, actually, uh, they are a long way from having one to build. They're still in the design stage, and the one that was farthest along was studied for determining that very question. And one of the scientists was from Stanford. One of the other scientists was a former head of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, very credible scientists. And they determined that the waste was likely to be um, up to 30 times more in volume than the regular. Yes, yes, more,
Did they say
more,
why?
and more difficult to handle. I don't know why. You could interview her.
Yes, I need
Right.
to do that.
Allison McFarland. Right. Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, Mary Beth, I appreciate I've taken about 30 minutes of your time. I really appreciate your time. I think the people of Wyoming need to hear this, learn as much as they can before lawmakers in the state possibly vote on legislation that would allow nuclear waste storage to be stored in the state of Wyoming, which, as we know, is a beautiful state. Have you ever been to Wyoming?
I haven't, but I have friends and I've seen pictures, and I'd love to be able to come sometime and know that it's nuclear free. Yeah.
Mhm. All right,
Uh,
Mary Beth. Well, so folks out there, if they want to learn more about what's going on around the state of Wyoming, it's wyliberty.org. Mary Beth, thank you so much. Is there anything you want to add before we go?
well, just to implore all decision makers in Wyoming to really look carefully at this because it's the track record is really awful of the nuclear industry, and you cannot believe the deals that they make and the safety allegations. We have good laws, we have good regulations. They're not being followed.
That's
So,
makes a big difference
mm-hmm,
without question. Yeah,
mm-hmm.
makes all the
Thank you
difference in the
so
world.
much.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Mary Beth. Take care.